I think that these really exceptional players, they have the capacity to look at a spectrum of possibility and say, this is very specifically what I want, what I'm focused on. And they wake up every day and they relentlessly move themselves towards that. And, at some point in time, it sets up almost like an attractor field that starts pulling them towards it, in the sense that if I want to be a top 10 player in the world, then the questions that I internally ask myself will be different than if I'm going to try to be 100th in the world.
Welcome to The Golf Parent, where you get access to the best minds in junior golf. I'm your host, Ryan Adams, and today's guest is PGA Master Professional Kevin Kirk. Kevin is a top 50 Golf Digest instructor, a top 100 Golf Magazine instructor, and he was a 2019 PGA of America's National Teacher of the Year. Kevin teaches a bunch of professionals, including 5 Olympians, 4-time Ryder Cup member Graham McDowell, 2018 Masters champion Patrick Reed, and LPGA superstar and Masters champion Lexi Thompson. I am looking forward to this conversation. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, Ryan, thank you so much. I appreciate you having me on the show.
So let's start here. Kevin, you've worked with some of the best players in the world, arguably some of the best golfers to ever play the game. So I'm going to do a thought experiment here. If I was to give you 100 kind of promising juniors for an entire summer, and at the end of it, I was going to ask you, like, which 10 of these 100 juniors have the best chance of kind of making it to the next level and then ultimately potentially to pro, what would you be looking for?
It's interesting. I think there's a lot of different formulas that you see people use to achieve success in golf. And every player has kind of their own blueprint about the way they go about that. And so it's being able to recognize that each one of those 100 kids is probably going to be going about it a little bit differently. And they bring different things to the table. Usually what I'm looking for is, or one of the things that I would say anecdotally I've observed, is that the people that seem like they have the capacity to kind of move up that chain you're talking about, from going from a junior to a good player to a great player. The first thing is they're hyper-intentional. There's no accident that they arrive where they arrive. So, they start with a very clear picture of what it is they're trying to do. It's not like I'm just going to go out and try to, be the best person I can be. I mean, they're very, very clear about, I want to be a top 10 player in the world. I want to be XYZ. I want to be an All-American, whatever that is. They are very specific about their intention. The second thing is they've got 1 or 2 character traits or physical traits that are probably 2 standard deviations off the norm that allow them to do things that the other kids can't do. And for some kids, it's physicality. For some kids, it's grit. For some kids, it's a different, maybe they're an exceptionally good iron player, but it's like 2 standard deviations off the norm, something that's exceptionally like a superpower, like in the Marvel comics, right?
Yeah.
The third thing that we kind of look for is that they've had some adversity. I don't think it's, watching kids that haven't had any adversity. Golf is so hard that if you hadn't had some adversity and know how to handle failure and know how to get knocked down your feet and stand back up and dust yourself off and move forward, it's very difficult for kids that haven't had some experience with that to actually kind of move up that chain, because the game is just so diabolically difficult that you're gonna fail a lot, and if you can't handle failure, then you got really no chance.
There's so much to unpack there. I'm gonna start with the most recent thing you said. So that adversity, are you talking about like kind of personal adversity that they've overcome, or where they've on the actual course where you're observing how they're handling maybe a double bogey or missing? Like, what sort of adversity do you rank the highest when you're looking at adversity?
I think it's interesting, and I hate to categorize kids in terms of,
Sure,
put people in boxes, because I just don't think that's the way it works. But let's just say that golf is a white collar sport, right?
yeah,
Played best by blue collar kids that have had difficulty, right? So it's been hard for them. They've had life experiences that are difficult. Maybe loss of a parent, maybe the parents divorced, maybe they've had to overcome some sort of illness or injury, something significant. And because golf is going to test you to that level, it's going to take you right to the core of your being if the further you get down that road. And so, unfortunately, having had some blue collar experience and some some toughness in your upbringing. And not that your parents have to be tough on you, but the point is that without having overcome and having faced significant difficulty and realizing that you're going to survive it, it's it's very difficult to handle the things that golf can dish out.
And I mean, like, we've all seen it on just like the amateur, like when you're golfing with your buddies. It's like as soon as one bad break happens, we all know those friends that you golf with that just fall apart, and then they compound it, then they kind of give up, and and you can clearly see the disaster that's happening from the outside perspective, where you can just see them imploding, and you're just like, wow, if only you had that ability to just kind of let it go and focus on the next shot, you would have such a better chance of salvaging the round and actually playing good golf.
For sure, I agree.
Okay, so you talked about hyper-intentionality right off the bat, and I don't think I've really ever heard it phrased like that. So I love that idea that the best players in the world seem to be hyper-focused. Now, you mentioned goals as something that they seem to be intentional about. What have you seen? There seems to be almost two schools that are forming right now, where it's those coaches or those people that believe success is kind of more focusing on the process and allowing the goals and the results to kind of take care of themselves. And those that believe that if you don't have a target, like where do you know where to hit? Or if you don't have a direction, where do you know where to go? Where do you fall? Is it literally one kind of camp or the other, or some sort of hybrid in between?
Yeah, I think it's probably a bit of both. I mean, I think that these really exceptional players, they have the capacity to look at a spectrum of possibility and say, this is very specifically what I'm focused on. And they wake up every day and they relentlessly move themselves towards that. And, at some point in time, it sets up almost like an attractor field that starts pulling them towards it, in the sense that if I want to be a top 10 player in the world, then the questions that I internally ask myself will be different than if I'm going to try to be 100th in the world, right? There's a different set of questions and a different, level of benchmarks and performance is required. And so I think innately, they start becoming their own, they start coming up with their own internal guide that starts pulling them towards that, as long as they can kind of stay focused on it. So being clear about that, so-called goal, I guess is what you're talking about there, is that I'm going to be an All-American, I'm going to be a top 10 player in the world, whatever that is. Then you have to be able to kind of do that. The next level of things below that is you understand what the benchmarks are for that level of performance, right? There's a very specific set of benchmarks there that would be required for a top 10 player in the world versus 100th in the world. And it's pretty clear on what those are. There's enough data around golf to support that. And the third thing is the training, the processes that you use to start trying to figure out, okay, in those silos, with all those different things that I'm trying to kind of get on top of, what things am I already good at? What things can need work, and then what's the plan, and how do I allow myself to kind of move through that in there's almost a little bit of there has to be a little bit of flow in that, because if you get too rigid in the training, and then all of a sudden, your golf is trying to do something else or move in a different direction, then you have to be able to adapt to that. So the process has to be, focused on really locking down on, okay, what is it that I'm going to be, what is it that I'm trying to do? What's my intention? What are the benchmarks that are associated with that? And then how do I set up the training and the processes that support that? So and then the final part is that the culture. What's the culture that you bring to your training and to your craft? How do I build a culture that's going to support that and make sure that that's also kind of woven into the training?
How do you define culture? Is that mindset? Is that the people or the environment that you kind of your own ecosystem? How would you define that?
So the culture is like in team sport is pretty clear. The coach walks in and says, this is our culture. If you look at probably the most successful sporting organization in the world, it'd probably be the New Zealand All Blacks, and their culture, they're very clear about these are the things that we focus on, and this is who we are. Right? This is how we do things here. Right? This is how we are. And so, a lot of the focus is really trying to kind of make sure that they adhere to that culture. Right? Now, in individual sport, it's hard because, you don't have teammates. Right? On a high school golf team, sometimes you might have some teammates. And I was part of two really interesting teams. I was part of a really good high school team that won a state championship, and was part of a college team that won 2 national championships. And so it was very interesting that the culture that was set when we got there the very first day was, we're here to win the national championship. This is not, we're not, and, that was pretty clear that's what we were here to do. All right. And so, and that was actually set by the players. Our coaches were probably neutral. They weren't causing any problems, but they weren't probably, hyper focused on trying to, some of the best coaches in sport actually set that culture. And so this is who we are. This is how we roll. And that's, and when you can get that going on, it can be a repeatable, they can repeat success. But it does start with intentionality relative to this is who we are and this is how we roll. So in golf, one of the things that you can do that probably needs to happen is, how do you want to be when it matters most? What are the 4 or 5 things you want to kind of bring to those moments when it really matters? When I've got a chance to win a tournament, when I've got let's say I've got when things aren't going my way, when things are in all those moments, what are the 4 or 5 qualities that you want to bring, the traits that you want to bring to those moments? For example, I want to be decisive. I want to be calm. I want to be present. I want to be fearless. I want to be focused. I mean, so I'm defining those very specifically, making a list of those things and making sure that there's some mindfulness around that's the way you're wanting to be. Because if you want to be that way in competition, you have to train it. And when that trunk slams in the parking lot, it's really important to make sure that you pack those things up with you and take them into your practice, so that when you show up in a tournament, it's kind of a natural warrior culture that you develop that allows you to compete at the level that you're trying to compete at.
So much good stuff in there. Okay. Talking about culture, it almost sounds like some of the programs that you were a part of, the players created the culture. They sat down, they said, okay, this is what we want. And then the coaches were like, okay, great. This is how we're going to get there. And it seems like in some other programs, the coach is kind of like a top down, being like, if you're part of this organization, this is what our ethos, this is what we're all about. In the world of golf and in parenting specifically, how do we do that then as parents, or what would you suggest? Would you suggest that we, allow our child to tell us what their high ranking goals are and facilitate that? Or, would you suggest that as a parent, we kind of set the bar and then hold our child accountable to that bar? I mean, it's kind of a slippery slope here.
I think for me, I mean, I part of our job is not, in parenting, is to try to lead people down a path, right? To lead our kids down a path and try to empower them so that when we're gone, they can operate. So, my thought process on that relative to my, to whether it's my kids or somebody else's kids, I'm going to focus on trying to help them understand the way I think it works, right? And then I'm going to take them down this pathway and say, you want to be I've got a kid I've got a young son that rows, and he's an exceptionally good rower, and he's in high school, and he and his little partner just finished 5th in the nation, and that, what we talk about with him is, or what I talk about with him, just say, okay, here's the deal, right? Here's the spectrum of possibility. How much do you want to bite off, right? And just take him right down that pathway. Here's the spectrum of possibility. Here's what's possible. What do you want to do? You set the intention, because the problem in parenting and coaching sometimes is we start setting the intention and the player's hadn't bought in. So it has to be the athlete has to be the one that sets the intention. And then once they set that intention, then we as parents can kind of figure out how to kind of layer in the benchmarks and support and all the other things that kind of go with it. And I think that sometimes we're so concerned about, our kids succeeding or whatever it is that we get wrapped up with, that we start doing that instead of letting them do it. Right. So it almost becomes like trying to take them down this pathway of discovery relative to, their, the way this works, so that once they get done with it in sport, they see how it could potentially kind of operate in, in other areas of their life.
And that seems to be the goal. And that is almost it's very wise what you're saying, because it's almost the opposite of kind of that toxic sport parent that is kind of pushing a certain thought that they have or a dream that they have on their kid. There's no buy-in from the kid's point of view, and it's just going to set downstream up for a lot of just pain and suffering on both ends here. You said something that was just fantastic, the spectrum of possibility. I have a theory that I've been playing around with, and I'd like to bounce it off you and see whether or not this kind of lines up with what your experience is. you're hearing these kind of like probable realities and multi-world theories and all this stuff that's kind of happening in quantum theory. And one of the unique things, it seems like in our own lives, is that we have free will, that at any moment we could literally just pack everything up and make fundamentally different decisions, and our entire trajectory of life would change. Now, often we don't do that because of comfort zones and safety and all the rest of that, but it seems like we really do have that ability to just completely change everything in our lives tomorrow morning if we chose to. And then the unique thing about golf is that it also kind of shows the myriad of possibilities as well. Like when you're standing over a tee shot, there's the water, there's out of bounds, there's the perfect stripe down the fairway. There's all these different possibilities. And what I've been playing around with in my mind is that do the best players in the world kind of like just they narrow in the tunnel of what the possibilities are. They're not like us that are looking at, ooh, what if my buddies see me, duff it, or if I hit it into the water, whatever. Like we focus on the wrong possibility or the spectrum of possibilities. Whereas the best players in the world really do seem to crystallize right at that moment of impact, either through their pre-shot routine or just through the power of their mind to only the possibility that they want to happen and get crystal clear with that. Does that seem to be the case? Is that almost the secret to playing amazing?
Yeah, I think that there's actually science to support what you're saying. I don't think it's like a hypothesis or at this point in time. I think it's pretty clear that that's the way it works. And, it's interesting when you watch people approach sport. There's a school of thought that says, okay, once you master all the technical elements of the sport, then you'll get what you want in terms of performance or outcome. But the best players in the world, and I've had the chance to be around most of them, they do exactly the opposite. They start with a spectrum of possibility, figure out what it is they want to happen. Let's say on a micro level or a macro level, they're still playing the same game. So it's like, okay, if on a specific golf shot, here's the spectrum of possibility. All right. So they stand back there. Okay, what's a good one look like? They identify a very specific thing that they're going to try to do, and then they let their body almost adapt to that. It becomes almost like it gets pulled out of their body. So instead of them trying to kind of force the body to create the result, they start with a picture and let their brain organize itself around, okay, well, how do I have to move and what's going to have to happen here to kind of allow this to kind of come out of my body? So it's actually almost like reverse engineering, to be fair.
And it certainly seems to be counterintuitive as well to the way that most of us think about it. We think that we have to make it happen through some sort of technical or mechanical or swing thoughts or something. But what you're saying is that the best players in the world it almost pulls out of them. They throw the pitcher out there and allow their body, just their natural athleticism, their subconscious, whatever you want to say, to execute on that.
Correct. I think the very best players in the world, that's why they're great and everybody else struggles. It's because they know that, either innately, they innately understand it, or it's been taught to them. Right. But they're clear that that's the way they operate. And when you watch them play, it's hyper clear. If you ask them the question, it's like, oh yeah, what's a good one look like? Okay, watch this. Here we go.
How do you train that?
There's through awareness. Everything is awareness training. It's creating awareness around the idea that starts with great storytelling, being able to kind of frame it up, tell them a story about how it works, and then get them to experiment with it. And I think that's in terms of kind of trying to lead them kind of down different paths. If we start with intentionality as a concept, right, and it's going to be a micro and a macro, right? The big picture stuff is I want to be a top 10 player in the world, right? Okay, well, what does that mean for this year? What have I got to do to kind of move myself, a step down there, right? So what does that mean for this quarter, right? In terms of how as I periodize myself through this year, what's going to happen in the first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter, right? And then what's going to happen today? And then what's going to happen on, when I go out to the course to play? I mean, it's interesting, even listening to kind of some of the different people in sport talk about outcome in sport from a psychological perspective. It's like, when you go out there to kind of compete, you got to try to relax, and then you got to really kind of just focus on the process and not focus on the score. And that's a lovely concept in the clinical setting. Okay. But the reality is in the applied world out there where the rest of us operate, it's almost impossible to do, because your stomach is going to be upside down. You are going to feel the energy of these moments, your own internal energy plus the energy of the environment, right? Um, and if you listen to the very best players in the world, they're asked very specific questions about performance, it almost goes always something like this. Not always, but most of the time, it's like, "Hey, Tiger, congratulations on your round today. Give us a little bit of thoughts on kind of what was going through your mind." Well, I knew if I got to 500 today, okay, they're starting with this intention, this outcome. This is the place I'm trying to get to, right? I knew if I got to 500 today, I'd have a good chance to put myself in chance to have a chance to win this tournament tomorrow. And I ended up playing great. Or, but, or even if it didn't go well, it's like, I felt like if I got to 11 under today, that would put me in position to be able to kind of, do this tomorrow. And it's like, it just didn't happen today. I mean, I'm going to go home and I'm going to go practice a little bit. I'm going to go out and come back tomorrow and try to kind of do it again. But this idea of focusing, not being afraid to focus on a specific outcome, I think is, when I listen to the best player in the world, I don't hear, trying to relax. Okay. I don't hear, they know that environment's, is exciting and there's energy in it, and you've got to be able to operate in that side of that energy. Now, I do think controlling the physiology is important. So learning breathing exercises to slow your brain down, get your eyes still, to kind of calm your, get the brain to kind of calm down so that you can operate. That's usable stuff. But a lot of the other stuff that we hear, and I'm not throwing the sports psychology under the bus. They've done a huge, they've really helped us in the sport. But I think teaching kids how to manage that energy that they're dealing with, maybe we'll start with the idea that emotion might just be energy. Okay. And the energy is either going up or it's going down. Okay. If it's going up, whatever we call it, we're going to behave that way. So if I start talking about, I feel the energy go up, in the situation that's at play, and I say, "Oh, I'm nervous or anxious," guess how I'm going to behave. Right. But if I call it excitement, that's a different thing. So I think being able to understand what it is that we're dealing with, just this upwards and downwards movement of energy, make sure we don't just, don't call it the wrong thing. So we start down some sort of reactive process, and understand that if I can steer that energy into this, and, into this game I'm playing, where it becomes a game where I'm just looking at these shots, I'm allowing my body to kind of adapt and react to kind of what I'm seeing. And understand also that if I get to the point where the energy is too excessive, then I've got to be able to have a couple tools, simple tools that I can use in that moment to get myself back, my brain calmed down where I can operate, breathe myself down, get my eyes still, and then go back to work. So, I mean, I think that's, having some sort of construct that they understand, so that when these things are happening, they have this internal awareness about, okay, this is what's happening. All right. I know what's going on.
Kevin, you're blowing my mind. I've been introduced to the idea that when we start labeling things like emotions, then obviously you're telling a story about it and you're going to react to that story. So if you're saying I'm feeling anxious or I'm nervous, as opposed to I'm getting a surge of energy, that's very, very different, what you're telling your body of how to feel. And so to crystallize it down to say, hey, listen, energy is either moving up or it's moving down. And that's it. There's no other story. There's no other labels that are necessary. Amazing and massively beneficial. How you mentioned making your eyes still and breathing as a way when the energy is going down to kind of maybe right the ship. What do you mean by stilling or steadying your eye?
So there's plenty of scientific evidence to support the idea that when people get nervous or anxious, their eyes bounce around and move. It's your eyes are part of your brain, right? They're the outward protrusions of your brain that kind of poke through your skull to give us information about the environment. So when you see somebody whose eyes are bouncing around, it's also it's a sign that all the other parts of their brain and the downward systems are overstimulated. Okay, it's like high heart rate, eyes moving around, and you could tell the kind of by their body motions. When you watch Tiger really at the peak of his game, all that he's in the middle of like the eye of the storm, and he would sit there. If you go back and look at him, you could tell his eyes are just dead still. So there's plenty of information on eye movement in terms of being able to kind of stare versus kind of, bouncing, having your eyes bounce. that's very, very helpful. That's why object meditation is such a powerful technique, right? So breathing, object meditation, where you just have to look at something and stare at it, those are tools that you can kind of use to be able to opt to be able to build the skills so that when one of those things is when you're in a moment where you need to do it, you can do it. And once again, that's also kind of part of your training. And I believe is being able to have, the ability to kind of understand, how to use your breath. And there's a million apps you can pick up anywhere. And then object meditation is literally, you can actually just lock your eyes on something on the horizon. People talk about looking at a candle or a flame, or, in yoga and some of the ancient practices, they've talked about it for years, but all those things are calming to the brain, so that, in spiritual practice, it's so that you can get in touch with your spirit, right? In sport, is so that you can get back to this process where you're not creating static between what you're seeing and what your body's trying to do.
Object meditation, let's just assume that we're staring at a flame or an object on the table just to kind of practice that. Would you be suggesting to allow your mind just to be as still as possible without any sort of judgment or talking about the object in yourself or describing it or looking, just letting it kind of just be? Or would you suggest really getting into it where you're looking at every, let's say it's a golf ball now, you're looking at every dimple of the golf ball, discolorations, like you're trying to immerse yourself into every aspect of that object, as opposed to trying to see the object without seeing it, so to speak?
I think there's different approaches on that. I think some of it, I think what we're trying to kind of create is the ability to take a hyper state with a lot of energy and bring it down to where we can kind of back into our operating space, where we can kind of operate at a high enough level, right? So we're trying to do this because we're trying to kind of slow things down a little bit. And so I think probably you're simply being able to kind of look at, get your visual attention fixed on an object, focus on your breathing, and just, as your thoughts kind of go by, you can do it for time. As your thoughts go by, your things are going to come in. Your brain, it's like a river of kind of there's things just flowing through your conscience, right? And this trick is just to watch them go by. You don't have to jump in the river and grab a hold of something that's going by. You just let it go by. It's like a ticker tape. At some point in time, it's going to tick out the other side. So just stay there, stay with it, let it go, and watch it pass. And at some point in time, it's gone.
On the breathing side, is there you hear a lot about this 4-4-4 type breathing in sports, and like, is there something that, and conscious breathing, and is there something that you're seeing some of the top players do? Is there a consistent kind of breathing technique, or is everybody kind of individual with it?
I think it's, there's so many different kind of approaches with that. I'm not into holding breath. I'm not sure that I think that, or if you're really trying to kind of get into a calm meditative state, that's holding, the holds on the front and the back of the breath are fine. But in a competitive situation, when your heart rate's up, it's almost impossible to do that. It almost creates too much tension. So
Sure.
it's just literally taking kind of maybe an 8 count in, 8 count out, something like that, simple, just to kind of get the heart and the brain slowing the train down a little bit, right? We're not trying to, go, create some sort of meditative state. We're just trying to slow the system down just enough where we can operate it up a little bit.
You finding that the top players in the world, when they're looking, are they target focused? Are they there seems to be a lot of different cues. Like, is there, like, Rory does that cue with his finger a couple of times, or you're paint or putting to the picture you often hear, or maybe I've heard Annika talks about like tempo in her mind. Is there a myriad of different options, or is there something consistent? Are most players using one technique to kind of focus in right before the shot?
I think it varies. Listen, the fact that you just mentioned 4 or 5 players that have different cues, I think would lead us to believe that someplace in there's room for individuality. And I do think that, that the one thing that I know for certain in sport is it's always N equals 1. There's no formula for it. It's like every player is, it's always a population of 1. So, what's good for Rory might not be good for Tiger, might not be good for Annika, might not be good for Scotty Scheffler, right? And so when you ask them, there's these concepts that overlap, but there's they have maybe some different ways that they kind of go about doing that. That's their own process that, that we talk about.
You have a reputation for getting the most out of a lot of different types of players. And one of the players that you seem to be uniquely positioned to kind of get the most out of is kind of arguably difficult personalities or difficult players. How do you coach a difficult personality? Let's kind of put this almost to a parent with a child as well. Like what do you do when there is, maybe the person's not as receptive as you'd want them to be, or it's not all sunshine and roses. How do you handle that? How would you suggest a parent or a coach kind of navigate that?
Well, I think, at the end of the day, I'm charged with being the adult here, and I'm charged with being the coach, which means that I have to kind of hold myself in a space where I'm non-reactive. If I'm reacting all the time, when I do have something that needs to be said, they're not going to be able to hear what I have to say if I'm just reacting to everything, right? So my job is to observe things, try to kind of watch their patterns. And when I find a teachable moment where I can actually step in there and have a conversation with them, I will step in, but I'm not going to, sometimes they're not teachable, right? They're just not, they're in a space where they're so either manic or whatever it is that's kind of going on that you simply can't teach it. So I look for teachable moments. I'm very mindful of that. I look for patterns, right? I'm not a very one of events, not a big deal with me, I'm an outlier. I'm open to the idea that if I have a kid whose generally pattern is really good and he shows up and on one particular day, that pattern doesn't show up, that could have been a bad sleep. It could have been, a lot of different things. It could have been bad nutrition, or it could be just the natural, just be in nature. I mean, there's outliers. There's moments that don't add up. So I think that being able to not be reactive to the small things, look for the patterns, remember that I am in this position of trying to lead and not, and so being able to observe and not judge, I think is helpful there, where I'm just trying to be the observer of what's happening and not judge it as good, bad, right, or wrong, or different. And then in those moments when they're teachable, being able to step in there and say, okay, there's something I want to talk to you about, and then try to address it in a manner that they can hear it, and that you can at least get it on their table where it becomes part of their awareness.
What's your thought on we've been talking about the mind and about getting a mind that's very kind of strong and awareness of our own thoughts and kind of like just harnessing or taming the tiger in our mind, so to speak. What's your thoughts on hypnosis and other tricks and ways to kind of help just dial in your mind for competition?
Well, I think the first thing to understand is about the mind is we're not our mind. We have a body, mind, and a spirit that we kind of drag along through time and space. And so our spirit is really the essence of who we are. Our mind's the part that makes all the noise, right? And, I do think it's important to understand that we can tell our mind no. One of the things I got off into after I got through kind of playing golf professionally is I got off into triathlon, and I was a pretty good age group triathlete. And one of the things I love about triathlon is that, you swim first, then you bike, and then you run. And usually sometime during the run, about 2 or 3 miles into the run, your brain says, this is stupid. You need to stop. And I love bumping up against that moment and saying, no, we're not stopping. Okay. Because about the time you start feeling pain, you have 50% more, you're only halfway to your capacity of being able to endure whatever you think is going on. All right. So just, so part of that is just helping people understand that when you bump up against that moment that feels like this is stupid, right? That's the moment of choice. So you have to say, well, I'm going to continue to forge ahead, or I'm going to let my mind kind of derail me. Right. And that's the difference between good and great. I mean, you listen to kind of most of the people who talk about, greatness, and in terms of being able is bumping up against those moments and then being able to tell our mind, no, we're not doing that. This is what we're doing. I'm in charge here, and the mind is childish, to be fair. I mean, most people's minds are just terribly childish. It's like, if I don't get my way, I'm going to misbehave. When things get hard, I'm going to fold the tent. And, I think that just being aware that that's the way the mind works, and understanding that you don't have to cower down to your mind, I think is probably that's a very empowering thing for not only for sport but also for life.
It's huge, and I've got a little glimpse of what you're talking about. When my wife was pregnant, the doctor basically asked her, she's like, well, what sort of husband do you have? And she's like, well, what do you mean? She's like, well, most husbands seem to, for the first child, fall within one of three categories. He either becomes a workaholic, and she's like, no, that's not it. He either starts taking on some sort of project at the house, like renovating the basement or gardening, something. She's like, no, we live in a condo at the time in downtown Toronto. Like, or he starts getting into some sort of crazy fitness. And he's like, well, he did sign up for a half Ironman. She's like, yep, there you go. And I had never run before. I don't really know how to swim. And a buddy of mine just convinced me. He's like, how cool is it going to be, Ryan, when your son is born and his dad's an Ironman? Like how cool? And I'm like, oh, and exactly what you say, where it's like, you realize that your mind wants to quit so much quicker than your body actually needs to. And you find that second win, that third win, and it's incredibly empowering. It's yeah, silly, but empowering. So yeah, I get it, but there's some pitfalls that happen as people kind of go from high level junior to maybe college to trying to get into the pros. What have you seen are some of those pitfalls, and how could you help maybe prepare a player and a parent to avoid some of those common pitfalls and just save some potential pain?
Yeah, I mean, I think trying to make progress in sport is very difficult, and I think one of the things that there's a couple of things that happen, but one of the probably the two things that I see happen most that can the most where most athletes derail is you have an athlete that's let's say played really good through high school and had a certain type of a very specific support system that they've achieved success with, and then they decide, oh, I'm going to head off to college and I'm going to start this process in college, and they get there and the support that they've received is no longer there, right? The technical support, the emotional support, the things that they need to keep moving down the track. And so once that support stops, then the question is are they able to sustain it on their own? And some kids can. Some kids start struggling because the support's not there, and then others start doubting themselves and start looking to try to replace that with other types of support. And unfortunately, if you've got a kid that's got, let's say, on a mastery curve, has got 8,000 hours of training, when they head off to college, and their body works a specific way. They've had a coach that's taught them how to play golf a specific way. They get to college and things aren't going well. So next thing you know, one of their buddies is taking lessons from somebody else. They go see this other guy. He tries to rewire their brain, and it always ends up in the same spot. It's just a downward spiral from there. Very rarely does going to a new coach going to help you kind of move upwards, right? One of the things one of the bad bills of sale that gets sold to youth athletes is this idea that if I get a college scholarship, when I get to college, that the coaches are going to they're actually coaches. They're actually going to help me get better. And the truth of the matter in college golf, that is not the case. The U.S. college golf system is not about development. It's about talent, ID, and competition. It's all it is. So if you can't find some sort of way that can sustain that development or the developmental curve that you're on and the things that you need along that curve, the profile for most good college kids, kill their freshman year, sophomore year pretty good, junior year they taper off, senior year they slide off the edge of the cliff and they're never seen again because they lose that support. In most of the programs around the world where they have golf federations that are looking after their athletes, they don't stop their development at 18 years old. They're clear that if you're going to be an Olympian, you can be a junior Olympian through your 23rd year. So from a sports science perspective, all the sports scientists are saying is that full physical maturity for males doesn't happen until you're through your 23rd year. All your brain, nervous system, muscle, all of it. So they won't even allow you to compare, a male athlete, a senior, an adult athlete until he gets to 24 years of age. Now, not saying there's some early developers and some kids at 20 years old that can play at a world-class level. But what happens in the U.S. a lot, and it breaks my heart to watch it because I see it a lot, is you have kids that are on this beautiful kind of trajectory, They get to 17, 18 years old, they go off into the college golf system. And, let's say in Australia, that they're focused on trying to take that 18-year-old and take him up that curve at 24. In the U.S. college golf system, once he gets to 18, you're no longer a junior, off you go to college, and the whole thing falls apart. So this time between 18 and 24 is critical. And we as culture in our country, in North America, I think you guys in Canada actually do a better job with it. But in the United States, we do a terrible job of looking after our kids from 18 to 24 years old. Horrific. And so, the only reason we have a lot of good players is because of a numbers game. We have more kids playing, right? But our rate of conversion of a good young kind of player to make a great player when he's 24 years old is not very high.
So if Kevin's put into a position of power and is able to fix the system, what would be an alternative? How would we fix this?
Well, I think early on, as you start moving a kid down this developmental track, discussion is not about what's going to happen, his 14th or 15th year. We're kind of looking at it. Okay, I want to make sure on his 24th birthday, this kid's got all the tools in the toolkit that he needs and he's got a really tough choice. Do I pursue sport, right? Or do I, or am I going to kind of, take this, if I've gone to school, am I going to take this degree and I'm going to go focus on pursuing that? And I'm going to use golf as kind of the great thing about golf, and there's never, the one thing I tell parents and kids is, pursuit of golf to kind of be able to play golf at a high level. It's like in the business world and the social world, it's like having an advanced degree. It's like having a master, to be fair. Because the advantages that gives you in terms of being able to leverage relationships, put yourself in position to be able to, if there's 5 resumes on the table and you've got one kid that can play really good golf, guess what? He's probably going to get the job. Because in the business world, there's a lot of value attached to being able to play good golf. It creates a lot of opportunities, and a lot of the golf is used as a place where a lot of business is done. And in the social environment, being able to play good golf opens all sorts of opportunities. So there's never any loss of time or energy, in terms of investing time and energy pursuing golf, even if it doesn't work out, because that's good. There's that you're going to walk out of there with an advanced degree that's going to give you leverage, in other areas. So in my world, if I could change the culture, I would just make sure that that all the coaches that were involved in the sport were clear that we're not trying to fast track anybody. We're not trying to make a 12-year-old world champion should not be anything we should focus on. We should have them kind of focus on developing physical literacy. We should focus on helping making sure that, as they kind of move down this track, that they're moving up towards this 23, 24 time period to make sure that they've got all the tools in their toolkit at that point in time. And that we don't derail or jump off that pathway, just because some sort of opportunity comes along. I mean, if you look at, a case point here, or a case in study would be Michelle Wie. Michelle Wie was the best female golfer to come out of the United States in probably 30 or 40 or 50 years. In an effort to try to fast track her, the people around her decided it wasn't enough for her to kind of play, just try to beat everybody's brains in women's golf or, junior golf or women's golf. We're going to go skip all that. We're going to take her at 16 years old, take her out on the tour. And then when we're done with that, then we're going to try to beat up on the men. Right. So now this little 16-year-old girl that thinks she's going to play in the men's masters, they're just wired her head up with all this stuff. And, if you look at somebody like Tiger's dad or the Williams sisters who did achieve super high level in sport, they just calmly let their kid beat those kids' brains in. He was the best player when he was 12, and he was the best player when he was 13, he was the best player when he was 14. They don't try to make a 13-year-old be an 18-year-old. And so I think that, not fast tracking, I think it'd be something I would really try to make sure that parents and coaches had bought into, this idea that trying to fast track an athlete is probably not anything that we need to be doing. golf is a late specialization sport. So nobody's going to be, an 8-year-old world champion, when he goes through puberty. On the other side of that, you may not ever see him again. So, allowing on before puberty, just huge, a huge band of physical literacy, trying to make sure they're playing a lot of sports, building a huge, engine that they can kind of focus on. And once they get past puberty, if golf's their thing, then, let's take them down that channel and take it from, say, 14 to 24, give them a 10-year run. And let's see if we can make a world champion.
What other sports would you say translate the most to golf for a kid to play? Or would you suggest kind of balancing it out to sports that don't, that are not complementary, but are almost developing completely opposite skill sets?
It's interesting. I mean, if you look out on the PGA Tour now, the kids are super hyper athletic. I mean, you look at Dustin Johnson, you look at Brooks Koepka, you look at, some of the women out there. These kids are they're all just incredibly good athletes. So I think probably prior to puberty, I mean, as many athletes, many activities as they can possibly onboard is probably the thing to do. As far as transferable sports, I mean, any of the striking sports, racket sports, hockey, tennis, are good. I think the martial arts are good for several reasons. I think, some of the rotational things, sprinting and learning how to move fast, and teaching the nervous system to kind of go quickly is really, really good. So, I mean, throwing is really good. The biomechanics of throwing and striking are almost, striking a golf ball are almost identical. So, throwing a baseball or a football, baseball batting is not great because the biomechanics of that are a little bit different. So if you're gonna do sport, I mean, throwing, sprinting, I think the racket sports are good. Martial arts, I mean, those would be the places I would start.
Which martial arts?
I think any or all of them, like they're very rotational in nature, and there's a ton of agility, balance, and coordination, speed that are taught in those sports, which is the ABCs of physical literacy. So anything that's helping the kids kind of develop those develop those get those tools in their toolkit. And there are windows of trainability. I mean, there's times when kids can develop speed. There's times they can develop strength, and that's pretty well documented. I mean, if you look at the long-term athlete development models, it's pretty clear on roughly when those windows are. And so I think that's something that I've always kind of tried to kind of use as a guide, relative to age group training and stuff like that.
Off the top of your head, can you share with the listeners and the viewers what those general windows are?
There's a document that I use. It's called Trajectory. It was put together by Islam Bali and some of his friends up in Canada. And I think it's probably on the internet. If not, I'll send it to you and you can distribute it, with your, to your listeners. But it's been my Bible for the past, I met Islam Bali when I was in the triathlon world. I went to a conference and he spoke at the world, at one of the conferences at the Olympic Training Center. And he just introduced this concept of long-term athlete development. And so he was the pioneer and the guy that brought that to the table. And at that point in time, he was basically he had been an Olympian himself, and he had focused on developing these developmental plans for Olympic sport. And I guess around the world, he had probably done 25 or 30 countries and probably 50 different sports. And he had taken a shot at golf. And anyway, he was at this conference and he had got up there and started speaking about it. And so I was up there trying to learn more about triathlon. And he started speaking about this stuff. And I went up there and introduced myself. I said, I'm fascinated by kind of that presentation you just made. And he goes, thanks. And so we started this conversation back and forth. And I was fortunate enough to kind of be able to kind of, get to know him, spend time with him. And he really helped me. You run across people that change the way you see the world. These fun Bali changed the way I saw the world.
Amazing. I can see everybody scrambling right now onto Google to try and find it. And yeah, I will dig it up or get it from you, Kevin, and share it in the show description as well, because that sounds fascinating. Did I hear it correct that you're out of the triathlon world right now?
Yeah, I haven't done much triathlon in the past, probably 5 years, just from a time perspective. I've started traveling quite a bit. But as I still have some, I think about it a lot, and I still do, probably most of the, keep myself fit enough that in the back of my mind, I'm like, there's going to be another year at some point in
Yeah.
time when the train slows down where I'm going to kind of get back out and try to go race with it.
One of my concerns is just the running aspect. As I'm getting older, is the wear and tear and the impact on running. With your research and experience, do you see that as an issue with the new shoes, or just like, is that a concern of yours? Like I'm also worried,
Yeah.
like you always hear Tiger with his knee surgeries, like, and he was, infamous for running 5 miles almost every day. And I'm wondering whether or not that's the best use of my knees.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, there's a really great book that I read. It's called, oh gosh, I'll think of it here in a minute, but it was very specific um, around running. And, obviously, I'm in my 60s this year. So for me, I've put a lot of wear and tear on my body. And so, I am mindful that, if I run, it just takes me a little bit longer to recover. Right. Um, in this book, this guy kind of goes into running as um, a deep dive on running. And so part of the book is dedicated to the focus on ultra marathoning and these people that do these ultra marathons. And
Which is
the other
crazy.
part of it kind of goes back into why running is so important. And there's a couple cool lines in the book. One of the lines in the book, the guy says, um, the name of the book is called Born to Run. And
Nice.
in this book, there's a line. He says, "We don't stop running because we get old. We get old because we stop running." And
I believe it.
in this book, goes in, he does a deep dive on running and what his hypothesis was. I mean, they actually there's a group of kind of these ultra marathoners that have heard about some guys down in Mexico that are running in these canyons, that are running these unbelievable distances and speeds. And so they go try to find them, and they find this tribe, and they run with them and have a race and have a big experience. But in the process of that, they were talking about the ultra marathoning and how, and the efficiency of motion in the body and how we run. And one of the things that they talked about in that book was this idea that the advantage that them way back in time, there were two kind of major groups of quasi, there's the Cro-Magnon man and maybe one of the other spinoffs that were kind of moving kind of down this human development track. One of them survived and one of them didn't. And his hypothesis was the one that survived had one advantage that the other one didn't have, and that was they had the capacity to sweat. So the capacity to sweat allows a tribe, allows humans to be able to go out and to actually run an animal down. So most of the animals out there can't sweat. So that the advantage that we have as humans is we have the capacity to kind of go out and run and chase. We could run for, at a certain pace for 5 days, and we could actually run an animal down. And that was the way that the hunters and gatherers actually, went out there and kind of, rounded up their food for a long time. Is they would just run an animal to death. So this guy was, the whole idea in the book was that it's built into our DNA. We've always run. I don't think we have to run fast, but I think continue to kind of run and keep, maintain that skill is probably something we should all do.
If you don't use it, you lose it. And as we're getting older, there seems to be a lot of advantages for keeping yourself as fit as possible for as long as possible. And that's what I'm grappling with right now. Kevin, listen, we've talked about object meditation, spectrum of probabilities. We've talked about running, triathlons. We've talked about, you are a very complex and a very interesting guy. I mean, if people want to just follow you, get to know you a little bit better, reach out to you, what's the best way for the listeners to kind of find you?
I don't do a lot of social media. I mean, I do keep an Instagram account, so it's Kevin Kirk Golf. If you want to try to reach out to me there. That's probably going to be the easiest thing to do. I've got a LinkedIn account that you can kind of chase me around. I don't post much stuff anymore. I do post things that I think that are relevant. So if I have something that I've bumped across that I think is really kind of interesting, but it's also a pretty easy way to connect with me if you want to find me through those those channels, that's reach out to me, and I'll be happy to get back with you.
Beautiful. Any final advice for those parents that are listening right now that have a young junior who's showing an aptitude and a love and an interest in golf, and they want to do the best by their child? They want to set them up for success without kind of pushing too hard, but also, being that kind of rock or that pillar. Like, what advice would you give to those parents to kind of help their child on their journey?
I think just remember that, that as parents, really, we should be parents. We should love our kids and try to support them. And the pursuit of sport's going to be challenging. They're going to bump up against things that are hyper difficult. And I think helping them understand those and how to navigate that is really, that's one of the beautiful things about sport, is it helps us, teach those life lessons that other things possibly can't. And I would just say that just remember that's the primary role. It's not to be, not to coach them. You don't have to, plan it all out for them. And I think, just understanding that failure is okay, is, they don't have to succeed always. Is probably something that's going to be helpful for them over the long haul and help them understand how to deal with both.
Kevin, this has been a real joy and a privilege. I know it was kind of difficult at the beginning to sync up, but I'm so glad that we did. Thank you so much for your time.
Well, I sure appreciate your patience, and also just want to, while I've got you on, I also want to thank you personally for all the stuff you do for all the people in the golf space. We are out here kind of trying to teach the youth how to play, but there's also people like you that are going around and promoting it, creating mindfulness around it. So I want to publicly thank you for doing that, and then also just thanks for having me on your show.
My pleasure, and this won't be the last time, that's for sure. Kevin, thank you.
Okay.